So today we have Sobiya Jawaid on Combat Files. I think episode number 5. Welcome, Sobiya.
Thank you, AZHER.
And believe it or not, we've only met twice. So this is going to be an interesting conversation. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell the viewers, let them know what you do.
Thank you for inviting me, AZHER. It's a great honour to be here and just to share my story. So thank you for the opportunity. So as AZHER mentioned, my name is Sobiya and I am the CEO of Empower and Excel Coaching. That is something I've been doing for just over 2 years. I'm also a mum. I am a wife and I come from a teaching background. In terms of extracurricularly, I have done kickboxing to quite a high level. I'm a European champion. I've represented the United Kingdom at European level where I won silver, and that's just like a snapshot of who I am.
Yeah, and that's
what I do.
just the kickboxing part is quite intriguing. I think you know you kind of exceed the boundaries of being a mom and a businesswoman, and kickboxing just slides into there. It's quite incredible. But what I want to do is actually I want to read a little bit off of your bio off of LinkedIn, because this is where the sort of next bit that I want to talk about is, and I quote, "I use my experiences of being one of the first hijab-wearing female British kickboxers to have represented England at a European level, where I won a silver medal. I hold a black belt in the sport, and I use my experience of being a mum, a professional science teacher, and CEO of Empower and Excel Coaching to help motivate and inspire people." That's quite a journey. And you know, coming from an Asian background myself, very similar to yourself, I understand the ways that there's a lot of things that are quite set. There's a lot of cultural mindsets that are very fixed. It's, you know, within the community. How did you achieve that level of success and those levels? You know, enlighten us with a little bit of your journey. What were the challenges? What were the successes?
So it is a journey, and I do use my story and my own journey, my own experiences to inspire people, because on the outset, success seems like, oh goodness, it's right there, but it's a person's real journey through their challenges. And so when I look back at myself, I never set up, and this is as far back as I can remember, and being a mum, I just sometimes think, goodness me, my parents really had a challenge on their hands. I never accepted things that didn't feel right, no matter how often they were said to me, whether they were from society or culture or family. When something integrally doesn't feel right, I think it's really important that we speak up about it. And so as far back as I can remember, I always used to speak up about what I felt was unfair, what I saw as inequality. And I think going back to that, at every instant in my life, there's been this element of resilience. And I think that's really important, especially for anybody who is successful, achieves anything. Resilience is really important.
I mean, it's interesting because your nature to challenge the status quo, where did that come from? You know, I'm quite intrigued, you know, because it's unheard of, you know, it's unheard of.
Yes, and this is interesting. I think it's really interesting to be very open and transparent about this, because it's not just with a certain culture. I have the honor and the I suppose the ability to interact with people from all walks of life, and there is a natural traditional role that men and women are assumed in any culture, and so we come from a similar cultural background, ethnicity. So I don't think it's just unique to our culture. I think just generally there are just certain gender stereotypes that exist. Even here in Britain, we're still fighting that amongst women, because there's that representation at high level, board level, of women is still not representative of, and it's not in balance with men. So we're all always fighting that. But going back to your question, my parents are very strong leaders, and for them to assume that they're going to have children that are just going to be really passive is absurd. And so even now, I say to my parents, and I say to my mum, a lioness doesn't give birth to kittens, right? You've got to just accept that. And that's part of it, because I think I've seen really strong role models within my own immediate family, my mum and my dad. They have been leaders and pillars of support for their own family, for their brothers and sisters, and for the community. And so seeing them speak up, and then for them to assume that their daughters or children would be passive is absurd. So that's where I think it comes from. It's the nurturing.
It's interesting. Was there a lot of emphasis on, obviously there was emphasis on education, I guess, at home?
Yes, so I came from a family that was they were very strong on education. My grandfather was highly educated before he immigrated here to the UK, and education was instilled in both men and women. I was the first female from my family to go to university, and when I say university, as in consecutive education, GCSEs, A-levels, went to university, graduated, got a job. Education was very important because it's light, and that's how I was raised, to value it, and that's how I was raised. But there was a strong disparity between the way men and women were raised. There were strong gender traditional roles. Women were to stay at home, men were okay to go out. And when I saw that gender difference between me and my brothers, I would speak up. It just did not sit right with me. Just because I was a female, I couldn't do certain things. I'm sorry, but that's not going to happen. And I was constantly pushing those boundaries, not in a wrong way, but in a challenging my parents, really. And not just accepting the cultural, because there was a big element of culture there, not just accepting that cultural dialogue that was just being passed down from generation to generation. And it was needed, because when you challenge it, that's when change happens, right?
Absolutely. And I think there's also, you know, you talk about generations. I've witnessed there's also always an acceptance of that's the way it's going to be, you know. I like you, I challenged a lot of things when I was in my youth, and I over the years I've noticed that culture plays a huge role in our upbringing, in the influence of our parents onto us as children. Do you think, I'm going to use this word, do you think culture kills? What I mean by that is, and I don't want to bring faith into this, because this is not the discussion around faith, but I believe that there's a real blurring of the two.
What, between faith and culture for you?
Yeah.
Okay. So in my opinion, from my own experience, I think culture, now in my adulthood, I really embrace aspects of my culture. It's a very rich culture that I come from, and for that matter, any culture is rich. But there are also elements of a culture that are a hindrance, that can hold people back.
Absolutely.
Not just with the culture that I come from, but any culture. There are always good and bad points. So for me, when I was younger, there were certain elements of my culture that were put forward and projected onto me as facts, as a law or a rule. Like that's what needs to be followed, because that's how things have been done. And I think through knowledge and reading, and going back to your question about faith, distinguishing between the difference of culture and religion or faith enabled me to really distinguish the two. But if you don't have that knowledge and you don't learn to distinguish it, the line is very blurry, and that's where I think it can cause a lot of difficulty and challenges.
I absolutely agree with you on that one. I think you're absolutely right. And over the years, I've managed to sort dissect and separate those elements, and it's worked quite well. But it's being aware of that. I think that's really important. Uh, just slightly moving on a tangent. Obviously, you had this challenge at home, and then obviously there was the schooling bits. So the two tracks that are running here. How was schooling for you?
Schooling was, I was, and I am a very sociable person. So while I was at
That's why you do what you do.
I do what I do, and there are certain elements to us and traits that we can't just let go. And I
Yes.
really enjoyed school. I had a great group of friends. But I knew where my vision was. I wanted to get into a really good university. I had my eyes set on a goal, and I think that's where it's important to set ourselves goals and action them. So that was my vision, that I didn't want to just go to any university. I wanted to go to one of the best universities in the country, not because that was my goal from a young age, but your surroundings influence you. My brother was at that point at a really good university. My uncle was, and in my mind, I thought, well, if they can do it, why can I not?
Yeah.
And so that's where you have keep your eyes on the prize. And so I had a very social aspect of school, and I was away from my friends in my classes. This is going back. This actually, as though you're asking me this question, and it feels like I'm going back decades, which I am. So at school, I really focused on my studies. And what's interesting is, and I've also been in the teaching profession myself, and we mustn't forget the pivotal role a teacher plays, because if they nurture a student correctly, that student feels like they can achieve anything and they can reach for the stars. But if that student is not nurtured in the correct way, there's a lot of obstacles that are in that student's path. And I had both aspects. I had teachers that really believed in my ability. And I also, one particular teacher I remember, made certain conscious and unconscious biases about me because of my background, my ethnicity, and my family. I came from a family where my grandparents and my parents immigrated to the UK, but an assumption was made that education wasn't important to us, but that was incorrect, because actually education was the core of how we functioned as a family. And so when assumptions are made, sometimes they hinder a person, and that's how I felt in certain subjects. But that element of me as being a really resilient person shone through. I had my eyes on the prize, and I thought to myself, actually, you can think what you like, but I need to get somewhere, and I will work my backside off if I need to, not to prove you wrong, but to get where I want to get to.
It's interesting as a young person. I want to ask this because you were, I think, just doing your A levels or something like that, was it?
Back then, yes, that's right.
When this was happening, and what goes through the mind of an individual at that age? Because we talk about major decisions we take between sort of, GCSEs to university in our career, and you have this person who's blocking you potentially in yourself excelling because they're not putting out the right signals. What was going through your head? What were you thinking?
I found it quite sad on a personal level that assumptions are being made about me. But for me, I really, as I said to you, I'm a very resilient person. And when I look back at that age, we make assumptions about people who are 15, 16, 17, 18 even, thinking they're very young. But actually, when I look back, I made certain life choices back then that have impacted my life now. And actually, I wasn't too young to make choices. I made certain intellectual and lifestyle choices, and they were powerful choices back then. So even looking at my mindset at that time and not letting those obstacles hinder me and having my eye on the prize in terms of going to university at that time for me, as there was an incredibly important part of my life. My dad said to me, because I went to the University of Nottingham and I applied through clearing, not clearing, but as a really low choice. I put down Nottingham Trent University, which had significantly lower entry requirements than the University of Nottingham. And my dad just said, well, there's no point of you going to university if you want to go to Nottingham Trent. And what I took away from that was, if I'm going to go to university, it's going to be that university. Otherwise, I won't have any other option. And so, you know, it was a bit black and white back then. So we're going back a few decades. And that's where I think I had that resilience, because I saw the difference between men and women. Men, as at that time within my community, within society, as well, I'd say within my community, definitely had a much more advantage. They had more chances to maybe fail and then rise again. Whereas for women, it was completely different. You are given one chance, you take it with both hands, otherwise you're at home. And for me, that option of being at home was not an option. That was nothing, that certainly wasn't where I wanted to be. So when my teacher came into my way and didn't believe in me, sorry, but I've got a bigger goal in mind. I've got a lifestyle choice and a choice to make about my life. And if that means I have to be resilient and I have to work twice as hard as my brothers or my male counterparts, that will happen. And we see that even now with women. Women in leadership roles will by far have to work harder than their male counterparts. And it's a reality we are facing. And maybe in a few decades, we won't have to, but we need to go through this transition, this journey, and we need to raise awareness and have these frank discussions.
Well, just on a note of bullying, because I think I do ask when we talk about sort of challenges, bullying is something that always comes in with a lot of people that I've talked to. It happened with myself at my school also. Can you imagine, because of my color? Were you bullied at school?
I wasn't bullied at school, and I'll tell you why. Because I had a strong identity. I knew who I was, and again, I go back to my family upbringing. My parents were leaders. My parents were strong people, and there was no chance in hell I was going to get bullied. And when somebody crossed that boundary, I stood my ground. And I think that then feeds into my kickboxing. When you are, and I stand by this even now, it comes into my coaching. When you are authentic, transparent, and you're clear about who you are, people can come and challenge you, but that authenticity, that core is there. And I think it comes, and it goes back into your identity as well. And a bully, going back to school, a bully is somebody who comes along and challenges you as a person. And if you rise up to that challenge and you confront them or you challenge them, you don't get bullied. And so for me at school, I wasn't bullied, no.
So what were moving on from there, you obviously, kickboxing was a major part of your youth. And I mean, I'm just trying to get my head around this, because, you know, I have a daughter also, and, you know, we're at a stage, I guess, as a society, that at least from my perspective, I want her to have this exactly same opportunities as my sons, you know, whether it's university or whatever choices that she makes. And I'm thinking at the time, you know, kickboxing, Muslim girl, you know, you must have got your father's blessings and all that.
My father came from a martial art background, so he understood the importance of it. He did karate himself. And I think the thought of his daughters just going to a club where there were males just didn't sit right with him, as any father. I mean, I can't imagine my husband being okay with our daughter going to, as in physically getting into sparring matches with males. It's that there's just this element of protectiveness that we have as parents, and I can understand that. So martial arts were really important for my father, and an opportunity arose where there was a female-only kickboxing club, and so he was all for it. To be fair with, he was very encouraging, and so he encouraged us to go to kickboxing. And when I say us, that's me and my sister, and it was something that was culturally very different. And to be fair with you, just in terms of how I made choices back then at the age of 15, and around that age as well, I made the choice of kickboxing. I also made a choice to cover my head. I was chose at that age to wear the hijab, which is the head covering. And it's interesting because when we go back to that age, we can still make conscious choices.
Yeah.
And we mustn't belittle the mindset of a 15, 16, 17, or even 18-year-old. There are choices that are anchored in certain reasons. And so they were two very vital choices I made at that time. And so my head covering, which was a really important part of my identity, which I did not want to compromise, and it requires strength, it requires resilience, and authenticity. And my kickboxing instructor embraced me for that, and never made me feel like I was different or less than, as I had experienced in different environments. And it was through my kickboxing that I flourished and blossomed as a person, both within myself as a person, and also somebody being there in your life saying to you, you are incredible and you are very good at what you do, and really nurturing a certain ability. So for me, my kickboxing was something that was nurtured in my kickboxing club. And because there was a safe environment to be who I was, even though I was not conforming or fitting the rest of the people, as in I was still authentic with my own, what's the word I should use, my identity, I was still embraced. And I can see the impact of that even now.
Yeah, and you know, what I'm sort of seeing and sort of, I guess, being present to is a very strong-minded, resilient individual, and you know the mindset is very strong. We all have voices in our head. We've talked about this briefly. What does yours say to you?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I'm going to answer it in a very transparent way.
Yeah.
And I recognize that I'm able to do that now because I recognize its reality. We all have voices in our heads, and this is not to say that we've got a medical condition, but just generally we have a positive voice and a voice that is there that is trying to belittle us and for us to go back to that really negative place. When we acknowledge that, and when we acknowledge the negative voice and we give light to the positive voice, and we recognize and we are self-aware. So within coaching, within the self-development work that I have done, it's given me the strength to be able to recognize it. And I can see, because in the past, that negative voice was enough to hold me back. So even in my coaching now, my specialism is to overcome. So I work with, and I help people to overcome their limiting thoughts, beliefs, and values, so they can be happy, content, and shine, and truly be empowered in their own, with their own values. And that requires a mindset where you give more priority to that voice in your head, which is about strength and your achievements and your successes, and not to that voice which is saying you're not good enough. We all have that. Every single individual in the world will have that. It's important to acknowledge that it exists, because unfortunately we're in a society where people just assume success comes easily and everybody is successful and everybody has it better than us. But we all go through our own challenges, and acknowledging the reality and then dealing with it is really important to overcome that obstacle. So going back to that question of yours about voices, we all have them. And what makes coaching incredible is, and especially the space that I provide for my clients, is it's okay. Let your guard down and talk about those negative voices, those limiting thoughts you have, those beliefs you have had from childhood that have kept you and held you back all these years, maybe even decades, and accept them, but don't let them hold you back any longer, because there is something unique and valuable about you as an individual that you can shine to the rest of the world, that you can share with the rest of the world. And it may not be something you can impact. The impact of that may not be whereby you're impacting hundreds and thousands of people, but even if it's one person, if you sharing value with one person changes somebody's life, that is incredible.
Yeah.
And the analogy I use is like a drop, no, not a drop, but a stone. When you throw a stone into a pond, those ripples go beyond the vicinity of that stone. So when you impact that one person by the value that you have to offer, and it could be, I'm not even saying you have to be the CEO of any business, even going back to the impact as a mother that you can have on your children, or as a father, or as a brother, or a sister, any role where you add value to somebody, just use that analogy of that ripple effect. You don't know the impact of that value you've shared with somebody, how many years and generations that's going to continue for.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I put out a post, I think last week, about I had a conversation with one of my guests about role models and the impact that role models have on, especially when you're at school. I had a guy who was my housemaster at school, and he would stand at. I wasn't very academic, so he would stand at the exam hall entrance waiting for me, and he would always say one thing to me. He said, "If you fail it, it's not the end of the world. It's not what you do here that matters; it's what you do in your life." And that has carried me all through my life. It's an incredible, he had an incredible presence. And I only found out after I left school and, did 5-6 years in life. And suddenly it just dawned on me that this guy had influenced me in such a way, which is huge. Look, thank you for that. And looking at the mindset, what is it that stops you? What is it that you fear, even after all these years, and your strength and your resilience? What are you scared of, if anything?
We all have fear. So that's actually, for me, quite a difficult question to answer, because I can't say I fear one thing, right? Especially during my self-development and personal development and through coaching, every time I feared something, I've made a conscious effort to step out of my comfort zone.
How'd you do that?
Because, so you want to really know how I do it? You're asking very deep questions. This is how I do it, AZHER. And this is, it's a very widely shared diagram. There is a comfort zone.
Yeah.
Right? And when you step out of that comfort zone, you have a panic zone and you have a growth zone. And I tell myself, I do not want to be in that comfort zone. And there will be some sort of discomfort when I step out of it. And something that it seems like it's not a minor story, but actually I was listening to the audiobook by Mel Robbins. It's called The 5-Second Rule. And sometimes we need to make a decision, and when we think about it too much, we hold ourselves back. And so that was life-changing for me, because I made certain decisions, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, made a booking, and off I go. And yes, it's enabled me to grow.
Yeah.
And so I don't fear just one thing. There's many fears we all have at different stages of our journey. So when we're 15, 16, we've got the fear of failing our GCSEs. We go past that, and then we have the fear of failing our A levels. We go past that. We go to university. We want to get our grade. We pass that. We go through our professions, and we have certain elements of fear there. Fear is always there. Nobody has mastered fear. And as somebody said to me just a few weeks ago, make fear your friend. Make fear your friend. and you are growing all the time.
Talked a little bit about recovery from ordeals, and what is it that one? How do you recover from an ordeal? And
Okay, sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry to interrupt.
That's
So we just so for the listeners, we've had a bit of a chat before this, and so there's certain things that are in context for me and you, but maybe not the listeners. So in terms of challenges and the recovery during my marriage, probably about 5 to 6 years in, I hit a real rock bottom. And when I say rock bottom, within the space of 1 year, I lost 2 significant people in my life, very close. And when the first loss occurred, it was really difficult to deal with. It made me question a lot about life. And the way I saw it in hindsight was, and actually I recognized it at that point. From the outside, it seemed like everything was fine. I was married, I had a job, a house, we had a family, we were both professionals. But after that loss, it made me question a lot of things about what my purpose was. But that was just a fleeting thought. I was dealing with the challenges of losing a loved one. And then after a few months later, I had to deal with another loss, another significant loss. And it was after that significant second loss where I really hit rock bottom. And when I say this, I'm being very transparent to the world. And to the world, it may seem like, what was the challenge? But we all have dark times. We all hit rock bottom in our own way. And for me, when I hit rock bottom, I can really understand when somebody questions whether their life is worth living, because I had those thoughts. I had those thoughts and those questions. Yet to the world, it may have seemed like, oh, she's in a professional job, because I was a teacher at that time, and she's got a daughter and she's married, and all these materialistic and outwardly things. But within myself, that loss made me question who I was and what I was. And I felt that was the darkest time I have ever been in my life. It was complete rock bottom. And there were people, my loved ones were around, but when you are at your rock bottom, people can pull you up, but you've got to put that strength into yourself. And that's where I recognize my strength, my resilience, and my tenacity really shone, because I had my family, I had my husband, I had my daughter, I had my job, I had all these outward things which are very important. But at that point, there were certain choices I needed to make. And it was my faith that got me through. And the way I look at that is, sometimes we spend our whole life preparing for a moment in time. And that moment can be a successful moment or a very dark point. And for me, it was a dark time. And how does that benefit me? And how did I get out of that struggle? Was through my own self-reflection and my faith. And it strengthened me. People who were around me were recognizing I was strong, but I didn't see myself as strong. I just felt like I needed to get out of this dark time, and I had to invest a lot. It affected me physically, mentally, emotionally. It took me over 2 years to recover from those losses. And I was focusing more on myself. It was no longer, I felt for years, from a very young age, it was about family, culture, society, expectations of what we should be to be successful. We all need a job, we all need a degree, we all need to be X, Y, and Z. But we forget that inner voice of who we're supposed to be, that contentment. And so I focused on that. And had I not gone through that dark time, I would never have risen And it was there where I said, I am no longer going to focus on being the best daughter, the best wife, the best mother. They're important roles. But who is Sobiya? What do I want out of my life? And my faith held me, made me stronger. It pulled me out of that time. It gave me focus. But then I started to realize I need to connect with my higher purpose. I need to connect with this reason why I've been put on this earth. And I always had that. I always had felt from the age of 14, 15, I had a higher calling. I always felt that. And to the listeners, I don't want this to sound like I'm talking in airy fairy language, but I genuinely did. Even when I was in my teaching job, I knew that I was serving people and I was doing an incredible job, because as a teacher, you're shaping lives, you're educating the future generation. But I actually had a higher calling, and I knew I had a higher calling, but I didn't know what it was. And it was through that dark time where I thought, right, girl, you need to connect with this higher calling, whatever that is.
And you're right. I mean, you know, it's an old saying, isn't it? Through breakdown comes breakthrough. And you know, it's my next question was actually your purpose. You know, Simon Sinek, why? Did you discover it?
I did discover it. I did discover it. So through that recovery phase, it took me over 2 years. I then became very aware, self-aware, and I naturally was gravitating towards circles of self-development and personal development. And I went to a coaching, 2-day coaching course. And in those 2 days, I was confronted with these limiting thoughts and beliefs and values that I had from such a young age. And they were laid in front of me, and I thought, oh my goodness, I've held onto these for decades.
Yeah.
And they're no longer valid. They're no longer true. And yet I've made them part of my reality. And those 2 days transformed me.
Yeah.
And I still had fears, right? As they're going back to what my fears, I still had fears. And this is where mentors are really important. After the 2 days, a significant person, at that time, she just was an attendee at the course. She said a few profound words. She's a very dear friend now. But I often say to her, had I not had that conversation with you back then, I would not be where I am now. And so she pushed me. I had it in me, but she pushed me in that direction. And I thought, this transformation that I've been on, I want to take it to other people. I want to help other people. And I don't want others to live in that limitation for so long.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. So you sorry, forgive me. So you know, you had that brief introduction, and that really sort of sprouted into the business that you've developed and you've worked very hard for. And I find it hugely inspirational, by the way. I think it's fantastic that you've taken this bull by the horns and wrestled it down. It takes great courage. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
So yes, the transformation had to come from within me. Yeah. And I think learning something theoretically and actually practically going through that turmoil yourself, you can never be a powerful coach if you have not gone through the transformation yourself. And so I had to transform and change and confront my fears and all that work I needed to do on myself. And it changed me. The people around me saw this transition and this transformation from where I was, this old Sobiya, to this change that was happening. And I have to say, it was very uncomfortable for people within my immediate circle, because I was going from being regarded as a strong woman, a woman who had a lot of resilience, to a woman who was stepping into her essence. That's how I see it, as my purpose. And I see it as not something that is personal to me. I feel this is what I was created for. Yeah. I'm doing something that's beyond me, not something that is personal just for me, but a part of a higher purpose. And you go into a completely different zone. Then you're in a completely different essence, and so that for me is how I operate my business now. And being a coach and creating that transformation in my clients is powerful, because when I hear those limitations from my clients, and it doesn't matter whether you are a unemployed person, a female who is just at home, or a male at home just as a parent, or whether you are the director or the CEO of a business or a company, whenever my clients have stepped into this, I call it this secure space, magic happens. And I say this, and I don't mean to sound again using abstract terms, but magic does happen because they let their guard down and they say, look, this is where it comes from. I feel like I'm not enough because this is the programming and this is the language that was used with me from a young age. And it's about challenging it, and it's about creating that space for it to be secure, confidential, and safe. No judgment. It's non-judgmental, and we need that. We need that to be able to emerge as powerful, authentic, and true individuals, because the voice of society and how we should be is so loud, and we need to move it to a side and accept that we have, and when I say we, each and every person listening to this, my clients, we have a unique light to shine with the people around us. It may be your children, it may be your family, it may be your business, it may be your community or the world. There is something there. And it's about uncovering that and giving the person the belief that they have it and they need to share it.
It's very inspirational and motivational. And somebody like yourself, when you're running a business like that, and obviously you're managing the expectations, the emotions, all that comes with it of your clients. When do you give yourself me time? Because you're a mother, you're a wife, daughter, businesswoman, kickboxer, ex-kickboxer, and I know that you get involved in a little bit of training and mentoring in that side also.
So your me time is, so my spirituality is very important to me, and that's time where I take time out for myself. And I would like to say that I have this me time cordoned off or blocked off for myself, but we're in the middle of a lockdown at the moment. So I'm not going to paint this picture that yes, this is on a Monday afternoon between the hours of 2 and 5 is me time. I do recognize the importance of that, and I do need that as a coach, because when you are in a space and you are holding a certain what's the word? I don't want to use authority, but
responsibility.
A responsibility, yeah. Because you are a coach and you have a client, and sometimes I'm coaching directors, and I've got to hold that space for them, and I've got to challenge and really be with them with my I respect. I find that space very sacred. I call it a sacred space in the sense that it's of immense value, but it requires a certain energy, and it's, for me as a coach, it's mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual.
Yeah,
I've got to hold that space. So when I go away from it, I need downtime, and I need to be in a space where it's quiet, I can reflect and recuperate, because it requires energy. And so I do need that. And so it's hard for me because I have lots of different roles to assign a certain time, but I have to give myself some time during the day. So I'm flexible with that.
Yeah. Do you have a mentor? Do you have somebody that you talk to bounce your ideas, the issues that you may face, advisor?
Absolutely. I always.
And do you think it's important to have that?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I have mentors and I have coaches, and I truly believe you can never be a incredible and powerful coach if you don't believe in the coaching process yourself. So for me, to be able to be who I am, I have coaches. I have two coaches, a business coach and a personal coach.
Okay.
And they hold incredible value in my life. It's an investment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because so I have that, and I'm very honest about that and transparent about that with my own clients. I firmly believe in the coaching process. In terms of mentors, I have an incredible select few mentors. My public speaking, for my personal life, for my business, for my spiritual life, because these are important aspects of my life. And interestingly enough, my mentors are not from they range, and this is the beauty of coaching and being in self-development, that you can connect with somebody on such a profound level, yet religiously you will be different, politically you may be different, but you share something, and it's a powerful place to be in. So I say this, I have got mentors who are males and females who many of them are not part of my faith. We're not part of the same ethnicity. We are so diverse, yet we connect so powerfully, and I can turn to them and I know I'm going to get sound advice because they get my vision, they get my core, they get my values. And they're incredible because each and every one of those mentors has come into my life, and it's been a turning point in my life. I've taken something from them, from my interaction with them, and it's led me to be who I am now. And if I hadn't interacted with them and I hadn't been with them, I can't imagine myself being here because they've been so profound in my life.
Yeah, it's about sharing, isn't it? Really, it's that collaboration and partnership. You know, not only to you towards your clients, but you also towards these people that you've aligned to support you.
Absolutely.
And it's really, really important. I mean, I remember when I was working in my own business as a director and, you know, as an owner of business, I didn't have that. I didn't have that, and I get it now, and it was a missed opportunity. But interestingly, what have you learned about people, businesses, and business generally, and especially about yourself over the last, say, 2-3 years, especially since you've been so successful in what you have actually established, and there's a lot more to come?
Yeah, God willing. Okay. I think the biggest thing, and I'd say the most significant thing that I've learned about myself is that if I'm going to help somebody and I'm going to impact their life, I need to be authentic with who I am. Be honest, authentic, and transparent, and serve. And when that is there on the table, whoever is meant to take from you will, and whoever isn't is not meant to take from you. And that's been a really profound lesson for me, because when I set my business of AZHER, I want to be realistic. I'm a woman. I'm from an ethnic background. I'm of the Muslim faith. I wear the headscarf, and so this whole concept of diversity and inclusion, I fit lots of those criteria. And I am very aware of the programming of and the noise out there in media and in politics and so on and so forth. That is a reality. And this is why I coach as powerfully as I do, because I've had to deal with that noise and to listen to my own voice amidst the noise of everything out there, and to believe in myself. And I say this in a very honest way to inspire people and have a very genuine conversation. This is not about me boasting or being arrogant, but I had a very big limitation on myself in my mindset. When I started my business, I had high aspirations and high goals. I wanted to coach senior executives, men and women in corporate, and directors and CEOs. I was aiming big because I wanted to scale my business. I wanted to create impact at a top level so it affected other people downwards in their businesses. And at that time, there was me, this negative voice little old Sobiya, can you really do that? Given the fact that you're a woman and you're from an ethnic background and you're a Muslim and you wear a headscarf. And that was there, AZHER, and that was there up until my coach challenged me on it. And through that coaching, I realized it's very clear.
Yeah.
Whoever's meant to take from me will, and whoever doesn't take from me is not meant for me. It's not meant to be. It's not about me. It's not about my ethnicity, my religion, my faith, nothing. It's about people and their perception and their views. And when I had that clarity, it was a game changer for me, because I started showing up as I am in my circles, as I am.
Yeah.
And I have clients who range professions, genders, nationalities, and for me that space is sacred, and it's special, because in that space it's not about labels or anything. It's about getting the best out of a person.
What is next on the agenda for yourself with Empower and Excel? What do you want to, where do you want to be in, I don't know, 5 years time?
My goal is to impact and change my mindset. So the more impact and the more mindsets I can change, so people are shining and living a life that is content and fulfilled for who they are, is my goal. And so in 5 years' time, I have a vision that I'm going to be making more impact on more lives. And as time goes on, that impact is going to increase. And I want to leave a legacy. And this is where this feeds in, because again, it has to be very personal to you. My grandfather passed away last year, and he was a man who served his community and the people around him. And after his demise, we saw people and we heard stories that we had never heard of, how he was so selfless and so giving. And I remember reflecting and thinking, goodness me, that's my grandfather, and he has left a legacy. There are people who I've never seen in my life who are here, who are vlogging about him, not vlog, creating Facebook lives about him, and they're coming on my feed, and yet I didn't even know these people were connected to my grandfather. And I thought to myself, right, this is a time where you and your life, it's more than that. It's about leaving a legacy, and for me that's really important. So to leave that goodness in people's heart, and that goes back to the core of my business and how I operate. Serve. When you serve, the impact is there. The seed is planted.
Yeah, it's like I said, I keep on saying it's very inspiring. And before we sort of sign off, is there a final thought that you want to put out there, sort of a final message to the listeners? And by the way, guys, I am going to put down all the links and all the contact details for Sobiya. So if you guys want to, log on and contact her, by all means do that. Hugely inspirational person. I keep on saying that, but you are.
Thank you so much.
So yeah, final sort of message.
The strap line to Empower and Excel coaching is be the person you want to be. And we live in a society where the noise is so loud out there, AZHER, it's enough to drown out our own voice. But in our true essence, we know what our purpose is. And it may be just, like I said, I don't want people to think, I'm always talking about business. No, we all have a purpose. We all have this inner voice. We all have this self-belief of where we can be. Listen to that and be that person you want to be. And you can. It might be a windy road, and that's where coaching is so powerful, because that windy road, getting from A to B without a map, without a roadmap, and trial and error, is a long journey. And when you have a map in front of you with somebody who's on the other side, who has stepped and treaded that path, that journey from A to B is a lot shorter. And that's why coaching is so powerful. That space is so incredibly valuable, because it brings out the best in a person. It has for me, and it does for my clients and for the people who are in the coaching industry. And so I always say, be the person you want to be. Listen to that inner voice, because you can. You really can. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
Absolutely.
And if this resonates with you, I'm very approachable. So it's not that you've got to pay me before you can have a conversation with me or anything, as you will be aware of, sir. I'm approachable. I find conversation very valuable. I take so much from every conversation, even with my clients. I always tell them that I take so much inspiration from you and from this space and from what you share with me. So if this really strikes a chord with anybody and they're there and they're afraid, right? As a fear is really important to address, because fear comes in many different forms. And sometimes it's a fear of, what will the other person think of me? Or will I seem less than I am if I just say I need some help, or I need to get over this obstacle? My opinion and my view is that requires courage, strength, and I admire that. And so if any of my content, anything I've said resonates with you, just reach out to me. Seriously. It will.
You've heard it, guys. Reach out to her. You heard it. Listen, I'm gonna just I want to say something here, because before we sign off, because I've actually written down some words of how I describe you and how I'm feeling. So if you don't mind, I'd like to share that with you. Firstly, I'd like to say huge respect. I mean, huge. Massive courage, strength, so strong, inspirational, motivating, forbearing. I mean, focused, curious, and I think this one's really big. Vulnerable. To show that vulnerability, it's not common in our community to see this. It's huge for me. It's massive. Generous. I mean, look what you're doing, and kind. You're so kind, and all those descriptions. I actually noted them down, guys. I noted them down after my two separate discussions with Sobiya, and I wanted to share this because, you know, there are people out there who, like Sobiya, are giving so much, and we need to acknowledge them, and we need to give them credit for all the hard work and the dedication that they're putting into their work. It's just amazing selflessness, and I thank you for your time, and I thank you for the insights, and this will be probably aired in the next couple of days, next 2-3 days. Any final thoughts?
I'm really touched by the words you've used there, AZHER. It means a lot for me to hear that. And I want to say that I'm really grateful for this opportunity, for you giving me this space to share my story, to help other people, to inspire them. And I take a lot from this as well. I take a lot of value, and I'm sure I've said that to you as well. I really respect this. And as you've said that, vulnerability is really important. We're all human, and we're assumed to be have some superhuman powers, to always be in this element of showing up as we're supposed to, as in whatever role we are in. But when we address those vulnerabilities, it gives that human connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's important. Sorry, that's really important, because when you have that connection, when you address that vulnerability, you can rise, and you can rise from that.
Yeah.
And I'm really big on people living their true essence, because I know what it feels like for not living that, and how long we spend not connecting with that.
You've got to have the authenticity internally first to be able to really, give externally. And one of the things that you and I have talked about is exactly that: is to be truthful and honest with internally with yourself. Certainly, that's what I've discovered over time. That taking accountability and responsibility of your actions.
Absolutely.
And understanding that creates self-awareness, and integrity comes in. I mean, integrity is huge for me as an individual. So listen, like I said, I'm really grateful. I'm so thankful to you. And like I said, all the contact details will be at the end of the show, and also on the feed through LinkedIn and the other social media feeds. Look after yourself. Thank you very much for your time. Take care of yourself. Take care of others. God bless. Goodbye.